Today we begin to put into practice a proposal that I made to you last week about how we can meditate on God's law. And if you remember why we want to meditate on God's law, you can turn back to the end part of the introduction on page 3. The scriptures are really rich and powerful, pointing to God's law as something which is good for us to think about. It's good for us to value. And if you think about God's law and you don't value it, if you think about God's law and you can't praise it, if you think about God's law and you don't feel any eagerness in your heart to read it, that's a problem. Because you should be eager, because God says, when the nations of the world look at my laws, they are going to be amazed. They're going to say, what great laws. And so you don't know what you're missing. Because if you knew God's law, you would be eager to look into it. The more you taste God's law, the more you anticipate its sweetness. The more experience you have of God's law, the more experience you want of God's law, but you need to get started. You need to begin to see and experience. And so you remember, I proposed to you a very simple method, particularly effective for lawyers, I think, of getting into God's law. And the ways are very simple. First, look at the law that we have and say, hey, does this agree with God's law in any way? Are the structures in our law ways that we know we are following after God's will? What a great thing if elements of our law, when we support them, we are also following the pattern that God has laid down for the nations to look at and admire. And happily, a basic way to look at your work in the law is as something which agrees with God's law. There are wonderful, deep parallels between our modern law today and scriptural law. A part of that is direct causal, in the sense that the legal systems that we have today in the civil law and the common law systems derive from the work of lawyers who are directly inspired by the Bible. The civil law system derives from the developments of Roman law by Christians who are directly inspired by the Bible. The common law system, likewise, people directly inspired by the Bible. They quoted the Bible, they looked to the Bible, they looked to its norms, they looked to its standards. It influenced the kind of laws we have today. Harold Berman's Law and Revolution is a great 800-page work just tracing how Christianity directly affected law. John Whitty's works, similarly, how Christianity directly affected law. You can read the hundreds and hundreds of pages, or you can take my word for it. Christianity had a direct, overwhelming... I'd read the pages if I were you, but you can take my word for it if you don't have time tonight to read those pages. That's one aspect. Another aspect is that God has taken the hearts of kings and he moves them in the way he wants to move them. And he protects the nations. He gives the nations certain protections by giving them a certain amount of just and righteous law. And it is amazing how much the law of nations today and the law of God's people, the law that was given to God's people, how much they are alike. And you should look at that and you should praise God for it. Because it means that you as a lawyer are serving the will of God when you work to see these principles of justice realized in people's lives. Praise God. It's just a wonderful thing. The flip side of that, the second principle for meditation, is to look at ways that our laws differ from God's law. And as the first was an occasion for rejoicing, encouragement, the second is a ground for questioning and worry and concern. Because when you work for legal principles that differ from God's law, If you work for a legal system that is fundamentally different from God's law, then you have to wonder, am I working against God's will? And happily, I think we don't live in systems where it's impossible to find work, good deeds to do in our legal systems. There are some concerns. There are serious concerns, and we'll talk about what those might be. But this is part of the two-stroke approach. We were just reading about it in the Psalm. God is good. God's good is triumphing in the world. But there are evils in the land. They are coming to judgment. Our job is to be humble, to be the meek who say, I'm going to follow after God, I'm going to do His good, and I'm going to let the evils be taken care of by God. Because He will bring His people into the land, and the evil will have their day of judgment. And so this is a basic thing we see a lot in the Scripture. We don't just pretend there's only good. We acknowledge the good and the bad. We discern the good with God's Word. We discern the bad with God's Word. So that's an opening, very simple way to meditate on God's Word. What can I grab onto and say, this is something I can do consistently with God's Word. This is something I need to stay away from. This is a sign of evil. This is a sign of something problematic in the law of the land today. The second stage of thinking about God's law is God's law not only consists of norms, that is to say rules. It not only says things like when you set up a property system, here's how it should be set up. You should have a 7-year rest. Every 7 years you should have a rest of the land, things like that. You can't sell the land permanently, things like that. It also tells us why. The law of God is not flat in the sense of simply consisting of rules for obedience. God could have done that. He could have said, I'm God, do what I say. And it would be a good thing to respond to God saying, do what I say by doing it. But God's law is surrounded by explanation. Before we ever get a rule, God tells us who He is, how good He is, how much He loves us. He explains how He's always trying to lead humanity back to its purposes with Him. His mercy to humanity, how He's reaching out to humanity, His love for humanity. All of that before we ever get to Exodus in the beginning of what we might think is the law proper, the norms. The Bible is full of explanations. Some of them are stories. Here's how we got here. Here's how these rules make sense. And others of them are within the law themselves. Just like in a case opinion, a judge might say, we are going to hold the insane accountable for their torts, even though they're incapable of mens rea. Some of my tort students go, oh yeah, I know what he's talking about. Almy versus McGuire, great case, right? But then the judge will go on and say, well, here's why we're going to do this. We're going to do this because the alternatives aren't good. If we have to choose between two innocent parties, an innocent insane person and an innocent victim of their torts, it seems as if the insane person has the money to pay, he should have to pay for his torts the same way he has to pay for his food and his lodging. That's the argument he makes. There's an explanation. There's not just a legal rule given, but we have a whole section of our legal briefs for the rationale, the reasoning of the court, right? Well, God gives us reasonings. It's wonderful. God explains Himself to us. It's wonderful. It's kind. God could just command us. He could just threaten us. He has every right to do that. But He doesn't do that. He says, this is why you should do this for your good. This is the good that I intend for you. You should follow this because of authority, but you should also follow this because it's good for you. It's reasonable. here's my account of what you should do. And so in understanding the law, one way to understand the law is in terms of the what. What does the law of God say? Another way to understand the law is in relationship to our own law. How is it like our law? How is it unlike our law? But another way, still richer, to enrich our understanding of the law, to understand what's great about it, is God says, here's why the law is this way. And he gives us two kinds of reasons. Some reasons concern right now. God will say, you should do this because if you do this, it will go well for you. You won't be hungry, you won't be thirsty, you won't get diseases, you won't have unnecessary conflicts. Things will work out right now for you. That's one kind of reason. And another kind of reason, I call that imminent reasons. The reason is present within our current time. It's a reason which is fully available to us now. But there's another reason that God frequently gives. And the reason has to do with drawing us close to him. And I call this eschatological reasons, which is just a fancy word for things that relate to our end, our goal, to the culmination of all things. Some of God's purposes are proximate to us and our circumstances right now. Don't commit adultery. Why? Well, you won't believe how much trouble that will get you in. If you commit adultery, it will destroy your family, another person's family. It will lead to disputes, murders, killings, all sorts of horrible things. Don't do it. That's a good imminent reason not to do it. But another reason not to do it is marriage is an image of God's relationship with us, his people. And if you besmirch the image, you hide a beautiful picture of our relationship with God. If you are unfaithful in your marriages, you are undermining some of the lessons you would learn that would enable you to be faithful with God. If you bring marriage into disrepute, if you make marriage meaningless, then you make meaningless this thing which draws us up to God. Okay? So that's a different kind of account of why the law is the way it is. One reason, if you're God apparently trying to explain law to man, is he says, given who I am and my love for you and the grace that I've shown you, things can't be any other way. Everything is being drawn to me. I want you to come to me. And this structure of the law is appropriate given my overwhelming love and grace for you. So, for example, God will say something like, if you buy a slave, you need to instead treat the slavery as a contract of service of 7 years. You may call it slavery, but treat it as a contract for service for 7 years. Don't enslave your countrymen, for real. If you call it slavery, it's really just a contract of service. And in the 7th year, the person goes free. And when he goes free, you should make sure he goes free with all the goods that he needs to found a new life. Okay? It's a pretty good law. Why? Well, he says on the one hand, it's a good idea because slaves and masters are in conflict with each other. And if you instead tell the person, I don't want you to be my slave, I want you to be my servant. I'm going to let you go in 7 years. I'm going to set you up in your own business. Work hard for me for 6 years. And then in the 7th year, I'll let you go free. God says he's going to work much, much, much harder for you than a slave would. Very practical, imminent reason. But God also says, and how could you enslave him? How could you do that? You were slaves in Egypt, and I set you free. You've experienced my love and my grace to you. I set you free. How could you treat other people differently than I treated you? Treating people like you've been treated by me is a way of drawing close to me. The law is intended to draw you close to me. How could you do anything else? Okay, see, one's flat and one is vertical. So these are 4 ways for us to meditate on the law of God. Is our law like it? Is our law unlike it? What are the purposes of God's law? What are the purposes right now? And what are the eternal purposes? What are the ways in which a civil law, for example, of property, can draw us closer to God? How do we think of it in that way? All right, so if you turn to page 6, we can try an application of this method. So God, when he gives the law, tells us certain imminent purposes for right now of his law that are very close to the purposes that some people raise today for our property law. So I'll give you an example here, Deuteronomy 15. There should be no poor among you. For in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess as your inheritance, he will richly bless you. If only you fully obey the Lord your God and are careful to follow all these commands I'm giving you today. So God has said before this, look, every Jubilee, every 50 years, all debts are to be forgiven in the land, and everyone who's had to sell their land, everybody who's had to place themselves into slavery or bondage to another, everybody gets to go back to their homeland. Everybody gets to go back to their original inheritance. The balances are re-leveled. Everybody gets their land back. Every family is restored to its home. It's like the delivery from Egypt. It's like the coming delivery of God from sin in the world. It's wonderful. It is a day of jubilee. Praise God. Right? And so he says, look, if you follow all these laws, it's going to bring prosperity to the land. There isn't going to be a permanent poor underclass in your land because there is a structure in the law providing for a pattern of prosperity and blessing, permanent ownership of the land. You can't really sell your land. Fee and tail. You can't sell it, okay? You can only sell your life estate, and then the next generation gets the land back. Professor McGinley, if you just frown a little bit when I make mistakes with future interests, and then I'll know that I've done something wrong. So that's one kind of reason for property rules that the Scripture gives. You should follow these rules of property because structuring property rights in this way, preventing permanent alienation of land, is a way of making sure there's a relationship between families and the land. It is a way of making sure that everyone is provided for. It sets certain caps and boundaries. Now, there's a very different kind of rule he gives. Leviticus 25:23. Same principle, the land must not be sold permanently. What he's referring to again here is this principle that all you ever do when you sell land is you sell an interest in the harvest of the land, the control of the land, up to the Jubilee. And then at the Jubilee, the land reverts back. So it's just always a lease, essentially, that you're getting. But here he gives a very different reason. The land must not be sold permanently because the land is mine, and you are but aliens and tenants. So here's a very different reason for not selling your land permanently, for having a system of laws by which you can't sell your land. The idea expressed here seems to be that if you treat land like a commodity, that is to say, like goods which are indistinguishable. Coal is a commodity. You dig coal out of the ground, you grade it, and then you can't tell one kind of coal from another kind of coal. It's all the same. You don't say, I want a Peabody coal, not Frankfurt coal, because it's a commodity. It's all the same. And you just treat it as a marketable good. God says if you treat the land that way, there's some problem. And the problem has to do with not recognizing that the land belongs to me, and I've given it to you, not as somebody who can treat it as they please, but I've given it to you the way it would be received by a tenant, somebody who's renting it. If you rent something, you can't waste the land. You can't damage the land. You can't damage the interest of the person from whom you're renting. You have to return it to him within a certain condition. You are not free to treat the land in any way you want. You aren't free to treat this as a commodity, something within your control, because it doesn't belong to you. Your connection to the land is wholly through me. You're like an alien. You're like a tenant. You take and possess the land with a sense that it really belongs to God, who created it, who assigns it to different people. You take it with the sense that the promised land was not something that we earned because of our merits. The promised land was something that was given to us freely by God because of His love. God says to the Israelites, don't think you're getting the land because you're such hot stuff. That's not why you're getting it. It's something that arises, it's given to you because of God's love. Now that's a very different reason for structuring the law. And it's good to think that God says both of them at the same time. He's concerned about our needs right now. Follow the rules I'm giving you. It will go well for you. It's good for you right now. There are good consequences that come from this. But also follow the rules I'm giving you. Because if you don't, you are pulling yourself away from the right understanding of who I am. Who I am is the one who gives you everything. Who I am is the one who put you here, who gave you your land. If you treat it like something that you make, you take, you deal with according simply to your own will, you are drawn away from me. Whereas if you recognize who I am, if you recognize the grace with which you've lived, then you recognize who I am. Two very different rationales for law. One concerned with right now, one concerned with how does the law point us to, direct us to, lead us to God. Make sense? Okay, great. So that finally on page 6, there again you see the chart. We know that the law of God is leading us to God. It is leading us to Christ. The Mosaic law is a pedagogue, pointing us to Christ. Its goal and end is union with God. It can't get you there, but it can point you there. We know that the law of Israel does this. We know the ways it does this. We were just reading, if we study more, we'll read about the eschatological purposes of the law. The eschaton is in Christ. The fulfillment of all things is in Christ. All things are summed up in Christ. All things are for Christ, by Christ, hold together in Him, and are fulfilled in Him. That's what the law is pointing to in its eschatological sense. You're worried about today, that's fine. God's worried about that too. He tells you laws that are consistent both with fulfilling your needs today and seeking Christ in the fulfillment of all things. Here's a structure to do it. Okay, great. We've seen one. Now we look back to our own law. What about our laws? Many of our laws are interested in fixing property laws so that they deal with this flat horizon of right now, appropriately so. There's nothing shameful or inappropriate about that. God's law is concerned about prosperity today too. Great. Our laws are concerned about that. But our laws differ from God's law. Not in their concern about immediate prosperity, but our laws differ from God's law at the level of justification, predominantly in they show no wisdom, no concern, no understanding about how a law of property might point you to God or not point you to God. And so a question we have is, if we identify similarities between God's law and man's law, hooray! Maybe man's law is also pointing us to God. If we see dissimilarities, maybe it's pointing us away from God. This is our work of discernment. Part of what we need to do to be discerning about the law we deal with is to compare it with God's law, compare it with God's law's purposes, and think, I want my law to point people to God. I want to be able to look into my law and say, this is how this law points you to God. That's great if I can do it. Or if I can't do it, I want to say, hey, understand our law is in a very bad situation. Don't take it as if it's a real guide to justice, because it's wholly focused on this horizon and it does nothing to point us towards God. And that's what a great law will do. That's what a wise law will do, is care not only for a man's stomach, but also for his soul. And that's what we have to discern. Okay, so we can start in that project. Over on page 7, praise God, property law is a huge part of God's law. This is why Christians were always immediately opposed to Marxism and to the 19th century predecessors of Marxism, which, just as we tried to eliminate sex and marriage today, as sadly the Supreme Court in India did yesterday, ignoring basic distinctions between masculinity and femininity in overturning India's laws relating to sodomy. We see here in the top of page 7 that God's law authorizes property, and so when Christians saw that Marxism and other radical movements of the 19th and early 20th century wanted to eliminate property law, they knew that Marxism was attacking something very fundamental to God's order. How fundamental? Well, we see it in the Decalogue, in the Ten Commandments. We see a recognition that property exists, and that not only should it be something that we don't act against by stealing, you shouldn't steal, but also inwardly, you need to respect other people's belongings so deeply that you discipline your heart against desiring what other people have or coveting. So Exodus 20:15, don't steal, don't covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, his manservant or maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Very basic. It's fundamental to the ethical system that God teaches that we respect property. Giving man property is a basic way that God blesses us. It's a basic structure of the law. It's basic to the meaning of the law that God wants us to be blessed and enriched with property. So Deuteronomy 6:20, one of the great jurisprudential passages of the Bible, Moses says, if you follow my law, someday your son is going to come to you and he's going to go, what is up with all these laws you follow? God gave you all these laws, and then here's the jurisprudential part. What is the meaning of these laws? This is a good philosophical, jurisprudential son that this man has. He doesn't just want to know what the laws are, he wants to know what their meaning is. What does it mean? What is the meaning of all of these laws? This would be a good son to have, right? If you like to talk jurisprudence with your children, this is great. And God has a jurisprudential lesson that he commands as part of the law. When somebody asks you, what does the law mean? You tell them. We were slaves. And the Lord brought us out. He brought us out from there to bring us in and to give us land, the land that he promised to our forefathers. What is all the law about? The law is all about giving people land. How important is property? Property is so important that if you want to understand what the law means, you need to understand that its aim and its purpose is to connect people to the land, to give it to them, so that they can really have it and hold it. It's really important. In times of great blessing, 1 Kings chapter 4:25, in the high watermarks of Israel's prosperity, you can describe what it means to live under a just rule in terms of everybody having their own property. During Solomon's lifetime, every man lived under his own vine and fig tree. This is picked up later in the prophets as what the eschatological fulfillment of man will be like. Not that man will be floating around disembodied with no body. Not only will he have a body, he'll have a vine and fig tree. So, connection to the land is deeply important. It jurisprudentially powers the whole of the law. By contrast, Genesis 4, when Cain is cut off from the land, he describes it as a curse that's beyond bearing. Being cut off from the land, having no connection to the land, is a curse beyond bearing, but it's a sign of prosperity when everybody is connected to their own vine and fig tree. So what follows here, we know basically that property law is very deeply worked into the purposes of God in history, to God's purposes of justice, to his most basic covenants with man, to what's good for us, and the deprivation of it is very bad for us. And then God's law deals with all sorts of property issues. It creates all sorts of ways of gaining property, ways of manipulating property, passing property to and fro. So I just list some of these ways. How can you get property? Well, you can take property that belongs to no one. When you capture it and take it, it becomes yours. You can get it by sale, by deed, by transfer. You can buy things which are purely futurities, future interests. You can, I'm over on page 9, you can get property by gift. You can get property by accession, which means if your property grows, you get the benefit of the growth. If I own a flock and the flock increases, my ownership of the flock means I own the increase of the flock. You can get it by acts of public authority. The government, when they come into the land, distributes property to all the tribes and families by governmental act, by the casting of lots. You can get it by judicial judgment. We have an example in Numbers with Zelophehad's daughters, where land is assigned to them by judicial decree. You have examples of testamentary succession, getting land, getting property by the passage of an estate from a person who's died to their heirs. It happens by wills in the Bible, and it happens without wills. It happens through what we call intestate succession. You have examples of lots of limited interests of property in the Bible. Trusteeships. David gives the lands of Saul to Ziba in trusteeship for the benefit of Mephibosheth's life and his family. We have examples of bailments and rents in the Bible, licenses and security interests, leases and possession, joint tenancies and sole tenancies. Now, I haven't gone through every aspect of property law, but those are some big areas. Property law itself, rights of possession, use, the ability to transfer, sell, the ability to divide property, to use it in a variety of ways. Many basic aspects of our own law of property you can find in the Scriptures being recognized as part of God's law. That's wonderful. Those of you who plan to work with property are doing things which are of great concern to God, so great that He puts it in His law, and He says, studying this will make you wise, studying this will draw you close to me, studying this is part of the great edification of your heart. There's a lot of similarities between the property law taught in the Bible and our property law. But there's also some important differences. And I've given you an example of property as it's defined really by the laws of the Roman Empire. The spirit of Roman law deeply affects Western property law to this day, and in this regard is very different than Israel's law. So this is just an example from the Napoleonic Code, section 544. It's a civil law code, but it's typical of things inspired by Roman property law. Property is the right of enjoying and disposing things in an absolute manner. I have property in something when my right to use it, my dominion over it, is absolute. That's what property is. The ideal of property is a relationship between me and a thing whereby the thing is absolutely in my power. It is wholly given over to me. There is nothing to limit my relationship to the thing except my own will. That's the law's vision of property. And just to give you a sense of what absolute means, here's a fairly classic 20th century exposition of this right, Roscoe Pound. He defines that kind of dominion as the right of ownership in every aspect over some form of property. Dominion includes, and then there's a bunch of very fine Latin terms, but I'll just jump to the translations. The right to possess the property, that is physically, to occupy it or to manipulate it, to make use of it, to dispose of it, to consume it, to reap profits from it, and to bar others from the property. Well, the Scriptures condition almost all of those rights. The Scriptures deny that property ownership is best understood as my relationship to things. The Scriptures, as we've said, have denied that by saying property is not predominantly your relationship to things. It's my relationship to things, and I have chosen to include you as a matter of grace. You don't stand in an unmitigated, unmediated relationship to things. All of your relationship to things is through me. You should not expect to have full rights because you take anything that you have pursuant to my will and my purposes. Whatever you have, you should regard as something that you have through me. It is not absolute ever. It's always conditioned by my will and my purposes. Don't think you can, for example, God says with the law of Israel, sell the land permanently. Why? because I gave it to you. You should think no more that you can sell the land permanently than a renter can think that he can sell an apartment that he's renting permanently, because it's given for a particular purpose. Well, the law of God, unlike our law, which tends to absolutize property rights. And today, because of government intervention, what it does is say, with respect to every bit of property, all the rights with respect to that thing have to vest either in an individual or the state. Every right to use, to destroy, to benefit from, to profit from, to manipulate it fully, you have to find either an individual or the state that has the right to destroy, to benefit from everything. God says, no. You've left out a very important party. Me. Your assumption that everything belongs either to man or the state is dead wrong. You've left out an important party. The one who gave you the land. The one who made the land. The one who made every good thing. And so if you read through the law of property in the Scriptures, you see God imposing lots of structures limiting, controlling the use of the land so that we use the land in ways that are reminiscent, that bring to mind the fact that we hold it for God. So I've collected at the bottom of page 11 a number of passages of the following structure. They basically say, in your use of the land, you need to be generous to people who don't have much or don't have anything. Why? Because I'm a gracious God who gave to you who had nothing. If you really understand and recognize where you got the land from, how could you fail to be generous to others in your use of the land? Sure, you could charge interest to somebody when you make him a loan, but do I charge you interest? Do I demand a fair return for the land that I give to you? I do not. This is a ground and structure. Israelites cannot charge interest to their brother Israelites. They can charge interest to foreigners, but not to their brother Israelites. Why? To recall, to show their understanding that the land was given to them by God. Page 12, similarly. The great Sabbath principles of the land. God made the land. So for 6 days we work, and on the seventh day we rest like he did. God set us free. God says to the Israelites, I set you free from slavery in Egypt. Therefore, rest, and let your servants rest, and your animals rest. I liberated you. In your use of the land, in your use of every good thing, in your own toiling, you need to act like I did. If you work incessantly, you mistake the source of your good things. So Deuteronomy 14, he says, for that reason, a tithe to the Lord, the first fruits of the land, belong to God. The first fruits of the land remind you of the land's power to provide, and you owe those to God. Why? Because he gave you the land. You also have to leave your land open on the margins. Because God nourished you when you had nothing in Egypt, you need to nourish people who have nothing. And so he says, your rights to harvest the land don't include all of the land. At the margins of the land, you have to leave it free for the poor people to come and harvest by hand. You may have read about this in Ruth. You own the land, but you don't have absolute control of the land. You don't have absolute right to profit from the land. You have to show a sign that the land belongs fundamentally to God. Page 13. Similarly, and this is very dramatic, every 7 years, you have to not plow, sow, and harvest the land. 6 years you plow and sow, and in the 7th year, the land gets a rest. It's my land. I own it. But the 7th year belongs to God. The 7th year has to be used in a way that shows not just my horizontal concerns, but my vertical concern to remember God. Every 7 Sabbaths, not only do we rest the land 1 year, on the 7th Sabbath in the 49th year, the Sabbath comes, you rest the land. The following year, the 50th year, is the Jubilee. In this year, not only do we rest the land, but everybody gets to return to their land. Even if they've sold it previously, we find out that the sale was not a sale. All the poor, all the indebted get to return to their land. For 2 years, you rest. For 2 years, you don't harvest. For 2 years, you have to trust in the Lord to feed you. This is such a big deal. This is so difficult that apparently the Israelites never followed it before the Babylonian captivity. And God says the reason for the Babylonian captivity is to pay back all the land Sabbaths. The land will rest for all the land Sabbaths that the people refuse to maintain. During those years, the people drifted away from God. They became richer and richer and richer, but they drifted further and further away from God. They maintained the rules that gave them prosperity in the moment, but they completely lost their orientation to God. God wanted the people to be in land. So, bottom of page 13, He gave the families inalienable interests in land. He wanted the people to be bound to the land, to be connected to the land, to have ties to the land, always to be restored to the land, every family to its place. Why does He want this? Why is land so important to God? Well, for one thing, as we all know in this world, laws of property are really important for wealth, for prosperity. If you follow these rules, you won't have any poor in the land. Well, we agree with that. Laws of property are really fundamentally important if you desire to help the poor. Following laws of just property ownership are critical. We see people who want to abolish property, and the people who abolish property do not make the poor richer. You abolish property, you destructure society in horrible ways. The government gains a huge amount of power and control. It's very hard to make decisions with that level of control. With all the goodwill in the world, you can't bring people to prosperity. But the governments that seize power to take all the land very rarely have all the goodwill in the world. You have guys like Stalin who think, well, I'll take all the grain from the Ukrainians, and if it happens to starve millions and millions of them, all the better, because the Ukrainians are a threat to my power anyway. Prosperity and property are connected. Does God's law teach it? Absolutely. If you help maintain the property law system, are you working for something that God approves of and wills? Absolutely. Does God want prosperity for people? Apparently He does. But we see an entirely different principle working in the law that's not just horizontal, but that's vertical. In the way that you seek prosperity, you also need to recognize that the land fundamentally is a gift from God. At the same time that you are built into the land, and you, in Israel's case, you have land inalienably. Nevertheless, you need to feel on the land like Abraham did. Hebrews 11:8. Abraham was walking in the promised land, but he walked in it like he didn't belong there, because he recognized that the promised land that he really was waiting for was not anything that could be had materially, but was a relationship with God. He recognized that the promise of a promised land was not simply for him to have two places to put his feet. It was that. He was there. But it was also something that was going to bring him closer to God. It seems to me in our case, we can look at differences between our law and Israel's law and say some of those differences are surely because of differences in place and time. We have many differences in the law. Some of them are wholly appropriate. Which ones? That's a great conversation. I'd love to have it with any of you. We're not going to have it today, but it's a really great conversation to have. Is alienable land good? Is alienable land bad? Would it be better if every 50 years everybody in society returned to their own holdings? These are great questions. It's particularly hard today since our wealth is not predominantly land wealth. What would it mean to have a law like that today? Those are all great questions. But I think the better guide for us today is to say, we have a law that works for prosperity today. Great. That's an acceptable and valuable purpose. In many of the ways we work for prosperity, we do exactly what God tells Israel to do. Wonderful. But we do nothing like what Israel did to help people remember that the land is a gift from God, that God fundamentally owns the land. We have no purpose in our law which structures our law of property so that people are put in the mind that the things of this life are not our only goals, that our fundamental way of going through this life is to use the good things of this life for reasons that are eternal and permanent and bring us into final contact with our great and loving God. You want property. I want property. Good. God says that's a good thing for us to want. We need it. Pray for your daily bread. That's good. There's nothing wrong with praying for your daily bread. There's nothing wrong with planning for your daily bread and working hard for your daily bread. Those are all good things. I hope lots of you have lots of daily bread. But Jesus says that the people who receive the land are the meek. They're the humble. The meek are the ones that inherit the land. He was quoting the psalm that I read to you this morning, Psalm 37. The meek shall inherit the land. The meek there is the same as walk humbly with your God. We should do justice. We should have laws of property that lead to prosperity. We should be merciful. We should find ways of structuring those property laws so that they don't concentrate benefits, but work against poverty. God says that's great. If you follow my law, you won't have any poor. You'll have prosperity for all. Super. But there's another part of this motto, and there's another part of the law of God. The law of God teaches us humility. It teaches us meekness. It teaches us to say, this is not my land. This land belongs to you. You've given it to me, and the way in which I use it, my right to it, is fundamentally structured in deference to your right. I believe Jesus, the humble, the meek, shall inherit the land. If we want people to have property, if we want people truly to be able to hold the things of this world, it's not enough to leave them lost in sin and greed and angers and all the things that destroy the benefits of the good things of this life. We need a law, or we need to talk about the law of property in a way that recognizes the ownership of God. That's the big difference between our law and their law. And we should think very deeply about that difference. We should celebrate the similarities. but our hearts should be filled with concern. Our hearts should be filled with a desire to find ways to reconfigure, re-express, to warn people about the dangers of the difference between our law and Israel's. Let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, we believe that the humble will inherit the land, and that only those who understand that the land is yours, only those who understand that the land is given to us as an opportunity for love and peace and generosity and love like you've shown to us, can truly possess it. Humble us, Lord. Teach us so that we can have the good things that you intended for us. Help us to treat what we have as yours. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.